Welcome to Talking Infrastructure, the podcast brought to you by global infrastructure consultancy AECOM. In this series, we'll be discussing the hot topics, key projects, and innovations that are helping to solve some of the world's most complex infrastructure challenges. Hello and welcome to Talking Infrastructure. Today's podcast focuses on skills. In particular, a conversation about the engineer of the future. What skills will they have? What tech will they use? And how do we plan, develop and recruit a workforce fit for what lies ahead? To discuss the topic, I'm joined by three guests who not only share a strong passion for engineering, but also a commitment to developing the skills we need for the future. Firstly, dialed in from Northern Ireland is Dr Sara Venning, CEO of Northern Ireland Water. Prior to her current role, Sarah was Customer Operations Manager at Northern Ireland Electricity, which she joined after graduating from Queen's University Belfast with a Master's in Electrical and Electronic Engineering. CEO of NI Water since 2014, Sarah brings a passion for excellence that is helping drive transformative change at the company. And then, here in the studio with me, I'm joined by Dr Alice Bunn, who is Chief Executive of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. In her role as Chief Executive, Alice supports the mission of improving the world through engineering. Formerly, she was the International Director at the UK Space Agency, responsible for increasing the UK's global influence in science, security and trade through space. And then finally, we've got AECOM's Energy Lead for Europe and India, Eloise John. With a background in electrical engineering and almost 20 years' experience in the energy sector, she brings together AECOM's integrated approach to help clients navigate the transition to a low-carbon energy model. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, now we're talking about skills of the future, but let's talk about what advice you'd give to people right now. Just an easy question to start things off. And Eloise, we'll be coming to you first. It's the tradition that we always go to the AECOM guests first. If you were advising somebody now at the start of their career, what would be the one skill that you tell them or advise them to develop right now?
So great question to start with. The basics don't change, so concentrate on that. But actually the added value piece around storytelling, how you communicate, and how you get people to understand that, you know, engineering and engineers are the future of what will create a better world for us. So getting that connection between people and ideas will be the piece, I would say. So all in all, the storytelling element of how we go about doing and delivering our projects and working with our clients.
So bringing people along, telling that the narrative that goes with it and ensuring people see the benefits, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sarah, I think talking about communications, dialed in from Northern Ireland, would you agree? Communications, what else would you advise somebody to embrace?
So my focus again was on people skills, of getting the best from people and working collaboratively with them, playing to the strengths of others. So it's maybe not all just about engineers, it's how you can get the best from everybody around you. And my last little trivial tip is, for anybody starting out, learn how to touch type. Your life will be so much quicker and much more productive if you can touch type as opposed to one finger type.
Alice, are you adept at touch typing?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
But, you know, there's all sorts of, support out there now, aren't there? Autocorrect. And yeah, that's got us into a lot of trouble in the past. Strike one to Eloise. Communications, I think is really, really, really important. I suppose back in the day, engineers just spoke to other engineers. That's not the world we live in now. We're increasingly required to deal with all sorts of people. I'm a massive fan of plain English, and I think it's really, really important that you can communicate directly and just take up all the opportunities there are. I mean, like many, I was a skint student and there were some competitions with prize money attached to them. So I would enter those competitions, but had the real benefit of enhancing communication skills.
Now, I think it was really interesting straight away, all the skills that you've brought to that conversation and what we sort of maybe look at the sort of the softer skills. And actually, when people talk about engineering, they often think there are other things that would come first. Do those recommendations that you've made there, do they correspond to what you wish you'd been advised?
I think they do. Because you use communications in so many different ways, ways that you wouldn't imagine at the beginning of your career. So, for instance, in my old job, I spent a lot of time working in the European Space Agency, and that's 22 countries coming together. You're having meetings in 4 different languages. Everything is being transcribed as you speak, and you sit behind a microphone like this. It's quite daunting, actually. And if you can get beyond that, you're going to be much more effective at communicating your point. So I think it's really important.
Eloise, do you wish you'd been advised about greater communication skills when you were starting off?
Yeah, and to sort of go a bit towards what Sarah was saying, when I started out my career, I naively thought everybody thought like I did. And the company I first worked for sent me on a course called Understanding Self and Others. And it was a massive light bulb for me. I had no idea that not everybody was like me, and I had to learn how to work with other people. I'm very fortunate that I managed to do that at that point in my career, and that's navigated me really well throughout.
Sarah, I think you were looking to come in then.
So I think from my perspective, in my early career, I thought the biggest skill and the best was to be the best, to be the most technical that I could be. That would be the greatest achievement. And yeah, I do wish someone had said to me, actually take a step back. That won't be what drives you forward, and it won't be what helps you get the most done. So being a great people person, making others feel comfortable. And then, I think in careers, people maybe move on from I need to be the best to I need to have all the answers. So engineers think that they're problem solvers and they have to solve all the problems. But actually now, today, what is more important is how you don't have to solve them all. You have to be able to work with a whole range of people and you'll get a much better solution. So I definitely didn't start out with that advice, and it is good advice.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Now, it's of course important to us that we're creating the content and discussing the topics that matter to you. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a minute to fill out our survey, the link to which you can find in the show notes. You could even win a Talking Infrastructure mug for your troubles. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. Has the job, it's a very direct thing to say, the position of an engineer, because there's such a wide varied positions of engineers, but has that changed since you started your careers? Dare I ask if it's more complex now than it was? And if it is more complex, how so?
Yeah, I think it is, personally. I think that from a kind of technical perspective, because nowadays we need to consider a much greater variety of issues. I'm thinking about sustainability. I'm thinking about critical materials. I'm thinking about energy. I'm thinking about, all these sorts of things you have to factor into a design, perhaps in a way that you didn't before. Certainly for the space sector, right? Back in the day, it was just a great big empty space. Not so much now. So we have to think about the operating environment. You think about space debris. So technically, I would say there's often a lot more complexity. But directly to your point, I think also engineers now do have to deal with society more. They should, right? Because I firmly believe that the majority of society's big challenges will only be solved by engineering. I think net zero is a greatest example of an engineering challenge. And of course, to be successful, you can't just, sit in your box and do your engineering. You've got to talk to finances. You've got to talk to, legal advice. You've got to talk to society. You've got to talk to public. You've got to convince people that this is a really important endeavour. So I think it is broader.
Eloise, would you agree? And it goes back to your point about storytelling, I suppose.
Yeah, it does. It's quite a moral burden, actually, if you think about it for too long. We have so much to give to society to enable net zero, is one example, to enable levelling up, to provide energy security to the country as a whole. It's a huge burden to carry. And you roll into that some of the aspects around AI, which I'm sure we'll move on to talk to later in more detail. But just sitting there and knowing the basics of the chemistry or how the electrons move, it's not good enough anymore. You need to be carbon literate. You need to be bringing in people to the conversation that enables you to look at the challenge that you're trying to solve in a slightly different way to maybe how you would have done 5, 10, 15 years ago.
And Sarah, has that been reflected with your career as well? Have you seen?
I think if we think back to early careers, it was a very structured world. It was very rule-based. There was prescribed paths, and there was probably a prescribed pace. And this sort of stuff. You don't need to get ahead of yourself, and that has all changed. So it's much more free-flowing now. I think our disciplines are blending, so you don't stay in a swim lane because we have to talk and we have to learn from each other. And even if I think about my world where I started in electricity, I've moved into the water utility and their world of civil engineers. But what are we all talking about? Net zero generation, energy from waste. So it is all very much blending, and I think the complexity comes because for us all with very structured and organised minds, we have to deal with a whole lot more chaos now. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more complex.
This is the crux of the conversation, really. But are we developing the right workforce to cope with these complexities? And Alice, what are the role for people, organisations like IMechE? How do you see your role in trying to meet that challenge?
Yeah, it's really interesting how you pose that question. Are we developing the next generation? Actually, it's now that we need to develop. So I love this. There's a statistic. I can't remember where it comes from, but let's go with it. It is said that 85% of the jobs that we will do in 2030 are unknown today. But it is also true that 80% of the workforce that will be in place in 2030 is already in place today, right? So you just wrap your head around that and think, wow, that really, I think, hammers home the argument for the need to be constantly upskilling, reskilling throughout careers. So, the question about whether or not we're bringing through the next generation is, of course, to point, but I think it's equally to point that we need to be developing in career as well. And that is indeed where the Institution of Mechanical Engineers can help you very much indeed, because it is about that lifelong learning. It's about that ability to network, ability to share best practice with your peers.
Eloise, Sarah, what do you think is the role for organisations like AECOM, like NI Water, in playing a role in this?
So it's essential, and actually the role has got to be about the collaboration between us as consultants and our clients. It's definitely more about what you can do together than individually. I think, sort of building on what Alice was saying, that there was a recent report by Powerful Women and National Grid that said in the energy sector, to meet our 2050 targets, there are 400,000 missing people with the right skills, which is how you get your head around that is just incredible. Building bottom up. So my son's doing a GCSE in construction and the built environment. Amazing. That was definitely not on the agenda when I did my GCSEs. And then our approach to apprentices, that's moving forward, and it's very, very different to what it looked like even 5-10 years ago. But we need to do more in that space as an employer. We need to embrace the government levies that are available to us to build that capability and capacity throughout our business. And then ultimately, as an employer and engineer, we need to remain curious. We need to keep asking those questions and be part of our institutions and give back throughout the institutions like we have the ability to do. Just, I don't know how much effort we put into it, and does it need to be more?
Sarah, when we spoke the other day, we talked a little bit about apprentices, and you talked about some of the moves that you're making to level up when it comes to the skills and the people you're employing. Can you expand on that for the rest of the group?
Yeah, so I suppose that's thinking about this workforce and where is the workforce, and are you closing yourself off to large swathes of the workforce? So something that we would see here in Northern Ireland maybe is that larger deprived areas and from in deprived areas, 50% of the young people from those disadvantaged backgrounds can leave school with no qualifications, and we're then closing ourselves off to those people if we ask for prescribed formal qualifications. So one of the things that we looked at, because where I'm headquartered here, Edge is on a very deprived was a conflict area in Northern Ireland, and so we've dropped the requirement for GCSE maths in our entry level apprenticeship program, and we're bringing people in. We've been targeting recruitment in areas of social deprivation, unemployment black spots, maybe rural areas, to widen our pool. We've been thinking about how is it that we can give opportunities to people regardless of their social background. So if you come and work for us, we'll put you through your driving test so that, then we can give you a van, then you're mobile. And that concept, which everyone's doing, but works so well for people of earn as you learn, and the ability to come in, to gain qualifications and to progress through. And that's an important strategy that we have deployed, that sort of grow our own, as opposed to go out looking for the ready-made talent. But we're seeing some success with that. And it was a brave step, and it's a brave step in a technical, science-based organisation to say, no, really, we are going to drop the requirements for GCSE maths. We'll test for skills, we'll test for capability, but we'll drop the requirements for the formal qualification. Now, we're in cohort 1, and it's working well so far, so we'll see how we go. But we're pleased to be able to do that.
I think that's really interesting. It throws up the question about the role of academia now, and how you talk about your son's GCSE, and that's clearly a qualification that was never around certainly when I was growing up. But how does academia keep up with that? Because again, we now appreciate I think that the skills that people bring aren't always what we would have seen as conventional graded skills. So what advice do we have for looking back at schools and universities, et cetera, to make sure that they're providing what industry needs and what the world needs?
Yeah, but it's amazing. I'm amazed to learn about your son's GCSEs. That's great.
Yeah.
But also, I think Sarah's story is really inspiring and really brave to take that step of, dropping the maths GCSE requirement. How does academia keep up? I don't know. I mean, they're trying, aren't they? T-levels coming in. That's quite interesting. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that's still taking quite a while to embed. And it is still a very academic path to take. I think at one point there was perhaps a perception out there that the T-levels would be a bit easier, if you're not a very academic character. And I don't think that's true at all. I think it's just packaged up differently with a greater connection into industry, which is great. But, intuitively it feels like there's more scope for that. There's more scope for vocational skills. And, I love the, earn as you learn approach. I think there is definitely more to be done there. And I was really inspired again to hear about the commitment from AECOM about thinking about apprenticeships and levies, because, the job's not done.
Mm. And I think, Eloise, you were talking about the jobs that 85% of jobs that we'll be doing in 20 years' time, or whatever the statistic is that we don't know yet. Eloise, we were talking the other day about the skills in your team, and you're heavily working in energy transition, a huge area of priority for lots of organisations, if not everybody in the world, really, or should be, we should say. Thank you for listening to our Talking Infrastructure Season 3 podcast. If you have a minute, we'd love it if you could leave a review, as this helps us to reach other people and a much wider audience. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. How are the skills that you're identifying for your team changing, and how are you keeping up?
Great question. So I'm quite proud that this year we've invested in our first computational designer. If in our business, we wouldn't have done that a year or two ago, and we have now, and we've got a second joining shortly. That's a massive step forward for us, sort of recognizing the need to have that skill within our traditional engineering business. We connect a lot into our colleagues in India. India are producing, as a nation, electrical engineers. It's a career of choice, and that's giving us a capacity that we can't access necessarily right now in the UK. The apprenticeship route is really helping us, specifically within our nuclear team. We talked about growing your own, and in that sector in particular, there's a missing generation gap of workforce when nuclear wasn't so popular and wasn't understood to the extent it's understood now. And so that's been an ability for us to create a team of people that we wouldn't have had access to otherwise. Keeping up is difficult. It really is. It's an ongoing daily, weekly, monthly challenge. And sort of to go back to your previous question, is our responsibility to connect in with academia and to keep that communication line open, so that we can help them understand what they need to be supporting the next generation to do to enable us to deliver what we have to deliver for our clients.
And Sarah, are you seeing the roles changing in NI Water, the kind of people that you're trying to attract and the job specifications that you need?
Yeah, very much so. And I think earlier you said, how are we developing? How do we know we will have the right workforce? And really, we don't. So what do we know and what can we do? I think we have to create a space where people can learn, can change, can innovate, can work together, have a bit of have a freedom that they didn't have before to come up with different thinking and different solutions. So I very much see that. And then the other part is you can't do this as an organisation yourself. So where can you harness and find inspiration externally? Whether that be through your supply chain. I think that's pretty important as well, and that has worked for us in some instances. Where even with startups, working with startups, they've got a great idea, but they need proof of concept. So how can we enable that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Just to jump in, your question was about academia and what are they doing? Are they doing enough? And I think what comes out in all these responses is that's just not how it works anymore. You don't go to school, learn everything, and then go into a job. The expectation is we are all playing a part. We are all making a contribution throughout career. Be that through the workplace or be that through a professional institution such as mine.
So how on earth do you plan your career? If I'm listening to this and I'm significantly younger than I am now, and I'm thinking, right, what am I going to do for the next 30, 40 years of my professional life? But we don't know what the jobs are going to be.
Oh, come on, who did? Who planned their career?
I had it all mapped out. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. This is exactly where I'm meant to be.
You can make sense of it, retrospectively, can't you? But... Sorry.
No, I think you do make a very good point there. But I do think that it's probably there is an element of having an open mind to the fact that you aren't going to have one set career, that things are going to move. And I think even in my professional career, over the last 25 years, I think we've all seen a far more of a shift in the fact that people aren't having this portfolio career idea. People are retraining. And personally, I'm sort of on my third career. So I'm a great believer that these things can work. But I think if you're listening now, what advice would you give to people to say, actually, this is how you keep an open mind. This is how you keep yourself agile and open to the jobs that are coming and the opportunities. I suppose that's what I'm trying to get to is, as someone starting their career, how do you make sure that you are in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that come along?
At the very early stages of your career, the best advice is never say no. Just try everything. Yeah. And then you get to a point where actually you need to be a little bit more picky and you need to decide on what you're going to do that's going to advance you as a professional. So when you were sort of posing that question, the words that were coming to my head were adaptability, the curious word, just keep learning, it completely paramount. and we talk a lot about mentoring in our careers, but also having your champions around you, and having that diverse pool of people to bounce ideas around. We're probably not that diverse in this room. Three women who have made successful careers, probably got very similar backgrounds. So having people you can talk to that see life through a different lens to you is massively important.
The next sorry, go on, Sarah.
I was probably just going to jump in on the pace of, don't plan. Don't get hung up on the plan, and I am not, because if you get hung up on the plan, you're constraining yourself. So I agree with the say yes, take the opportunities in the early career, and probably other pieces. Well, believe in yourself, so you can do a whole lot more than you think you can, and personal resilience is probably another piece that is important to enable you to adapt, because you're going to be hit with a change. There will be an opportunity. You might have to take a bit of a leap. And so it's A, I can do more than I think, and B, I can have a degree of try to develop that great degree of resilience.
When we talk about resilience and we talk about things changing at pace, you mentioned it earlier, Eloise, and we can't talk about the engineer of the future without talking about AI, talking about artificial intelligence. It's something that obviously has been around for a long time, but it really feels like in the last 12, 18 months, it's suddenly been really thrust upon us. Personally, I had an AI trainer, external trainer, come in and speak to my marketing and comms team this week, which was absolutely fascinating and terrifying at the same in the same way. How are you starting to see things changing with AI? How are you? And I always say to people about it, talking about AI as an opportunity rather than a threat. But how do you keep pace with it? How do you make sure that you are using it for the opportunity that it is?
It's really difficult because there is a risk element associated with it. We call it it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we do it through a few mechanisms. Networking with our clients and in institutions, for example, to make sure that we're keeping up to speed with their level. The graduates that are coming through know so much more than we do. And we are entering a space where just because you've got 15 years experience, you may not have the knowledge associated with the specific task that we're doing. And so making sure that we've got those connections. Simple things like at the start of a meeting this week, we had our global energy and environmental leads over, and we were doing some strategy workshops. So at the start of the meeting, we did a values moment on AI and just picked a couple of things that could be changing our business in the not too distant future. So making sure that we're sort of talking up the way as well. I'm not 100% sure I'm answering your question here, James, am I?
Well, I mean, say if I can tell us a story about the podcast. So when we launched this season back at the end of last year, one of my systems guys took a video that I'd filmed in the studio introducing the podcast, put it through an AI translation tool, and then sent it to me. And it was a video of me talking to that camera there, but in Spanish. And my lips are moving and I'm speaking Spanish, and it's James Banks speaking Spanish. I cannot speak Spanish. And it was that moment of you kind of almost want to hide from it because you don't know what to do with it. And it instantly gets in a too hard bucket. And I've shown it to lots of people. I've shown it to my team in Madrid. Apparently it's 90% there, although I am a little bit Mexican. So there is room to improve there, and I may well actually splice it into this video because people, it's incredible. But it's that, how do we use that, and how do we don't just put it in the too hard bucket. We think about the ethical dilemma of well, am I fraudulently pretending that I can speak Spanish when clearly I can't, and how can we facilitate that? But I think that's a question that we're all asking at the moment. How can we use this? How can we embrace it? How can we make sure that we're keeping up to speed with it and being part of the conversation?
Yeah, and it's here,
and keeping people safe.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think that, as a corporate, we've been having conversations about how do we give people the tools to play with it in a way that they're not playing with it in open source and putting your data and your information out when you don't want it to be out. So we've had a thought on that. And then I think, Eloise, that piece of talking to others and learning from others. So we've used something over here, it's called the Small Business Research Initiative, to work with some startups to, see some end use for AI in a very, very practical and basic sense. But, if you can take small steps, then you can gain a bit of familiarity, people can get a bit of experience to it, and then maybe you can progress. So we're not going to jump to full implementation across the board, but we're open to it. And James, I think it was you that said, we're open to the opportunity of it as well as considering the threat. But it's tricky, and we certainly don't have the answers.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, just 12 months ago, right, we were still talking about this, and we're talking about it, talking about regulation.
Yeah.
As though there is this kind of one-size-fits-all solution. That's clearly not true. The way in which we might use AI to improve, I don't know, an administrative task versus the way in which we might use AI for some kind of safety critical function is going to be vastly different, right? So if we do ever get to regulation, it's going to be in verticals. It's not going to be in horizontals, depending on how we're using it. But boom, it's here, right?
Yeah.
We can't keep talking about it. It's here. We've got to work it out. And I do think there's a lot to be said for, as both Sarah and Eloise were saying, in that sharing of best practice, because, you're not going to get around it. You can get on board and you get left behind. So I think all that we can do to make sure that we are sharing best practice in a safe way is the way forward. It's funny, I was thinking about it the other day. It's not dissimilar in my old, space world. We used to talk about it in the operating environment, and, there, all the norms and, regulations were set ultimately by the UN, right? Which is this, as most people would, I think, agree, a very, very, very slow moving beast. It just isn't suitable to keep up with the pace of technological change. And I think that's where we are with AI as well.
Yeah.
So we have to find, like-minded actors to work with to find a safe way of taking advantage of the opportunity. Because at the end of the day, right, I'm sounding a bit bleak. It is really a fantastic opportunity.
It is. And I think for me, it's that, and I sort of said to my team, I want you to be part of the conversation. Just get up to speed with it as much as you can and look at how we can use it as an opportunity, not as a threat. And you've got to be part of it. It was really interesting. The trainer that came in, the presentation he gave me was changed from the week before because he said, "I'm sorry, it's not what I told you I'd present because it's changed since then." And I'm sure if I brought him in next week, he'd say the same again. So yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely. Terribly exciting. Very fascinating.
Want more insights from infrastructure industry experts? Check out our latest Future of Infrastructure Global Research Report. In it, we explore one of the most complex, important shifts happening across the world today, the energy transition, and what it means for you. We surveyed nearly 850 senior executives and interviewed public and private sector leaders to find practical, profitable, predictable, and people-centric pathways to net zero. To explore the research, please visit infrastructure.aecom.com. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode.
Now, you mentioned then about bringing in best practice. The role of traditional engineering, as you say you've all come from very similar backgrounds. Are we going to see more sort of cross-pollination from different industries in the future? Looking at people, but as you say, people don't have a set career as an engineer. They may well go work in different industries. Are we going to move away from that? Are we going to be looking to best practice from other areas, other industries, other professions to make our engineers more aware?
I think inevitably. I think, the engineering discipline changes, from top to bottom. I mean, I can speak on the space sector. Space missions used to be one-offs, exquisite pieces of engineering that would be painstakingly, uniquely developed. Now it's mass manufacture. Right? It's loads of, shoebox-sized small satellites. So the skills that you need for that are completely different. They're not coming out of, exquisite university labs. They're coming off the manufacturing line. They really are. So that changes already. But I suppose it's a bit to what we were saying before. I think increasingly, and again, I passionately believe that engineering will be the thing that is so important to so much societal challenge. So inevitably, it's going to touch across wider disciplines, be they legal, financial, societal, etc.
Sarah, are you seeing? Sorry, go on.
I think that is the case. Maybe some of the spin that I might have on it is engineers, yes, and engineering is important, but understanding behaviour is equally as important. So we have some really smart, talented people. So if you even just think about water, and what do we need to do here? We need to use less. We need to use a whole lot less water right across. Northern Ireland is really bad. Here we're using about 165 litres of water per person. Across in the UK, you're trying to get down to 140 litres of water per person. In Australia, 100 litres of water per person would be too much. So we're wasteful of water and we need to reduce consumption. And that's psychology and that's behaviour, and that's not purely, can't be driven just by engineering solutions. And engineers have to think, Eloise talked about the story, the why do we need to use less water? And so the combination of the story and then what makes people change their behaviour all starts to come together to get the outcome that is needed, which factors in the big engineering solution. So I definitely think, and I think that cross-disciplinary of, energy's coming in to everything, sustainability's coming in, carbon's coming in. Mm-hmm. So we just can't think about the electrons or the chemical makeup of materials. I definitely think that cross-pollination and just it will change, or it has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this podcast was the systems in systems thinking. So, the fact that an industrial client may have excess heat or energy of some form, how do you reuse that to help somebody who needs that heat or capacity? Actually, a colleague of mine, Helena, tells a very good story around as toddlers were taught to share. And as adults, we want our own car and our own driveway with our own garden. And that mindset and that philosophy needs to change because we can't continue to waste the resources that we have. And that is part of the engineer of the future that needs to be looking at that from a systems perspective, not just from the water perspective or just from the energy perspective. It's got to be wider than that.
So you mentioned it again there, the engineer of the future. So are we now starting to build up a picture of what the engineer of the future looks like? Are we starting to get an answer? Clearly there is no answer. But what do we think? I've heard collaboration of communications, diversity of thought, diversity of background, professional diversity. What else is the engineer of the future going to need?
Yeah, I take great heart from talking to my kids and their friends because I do find the next generation are very, very purpose-driven. And I think, again, back to the storytelling and all those things, actually harnessing that and being able to make engineering relatable to, that purpose and the big challenges is going to be really, really important. But I think they've got it. They've got it certainly much more than some previous generations have had.
Sarah, what do you think? Are we heading in the right direction for the engineer of the future?
Well, we have to be because we're heading towards the future. So I think we have to make the most of what we have. But yes, and I think we, if you think about the workplace and what we're doing, certainly a lot of our development is we're not sending people purely to go and do technical courses. We're taking that as a given almost. You have that. That's your basic. That's your entry level now. And we're trying to develop and create the space for them to more and more interact with different people and different, I think, as mentioned before, different industries as well. So, I'm in a utility, but we're thinking about production lines and how we make our work think like a production line, and that has driven so much improvements in process. The whole systems thing is, including the farmers thinking about your catchments, where does the water come from, where will the wastewater go to, and all those kinds of things we're working on. So look, I don't know if we have all the answers, but we're certainly progressing towards the future. So we just have to do our best. I think that's all we can do.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything to add to that.
Perfect. Right. Okay. So final question, the simple question. What's the key piece of advice? I asked you at the beginning what you'd send back, but what is the key piece of advice that you believe is crucial for our listeners? What's the key takeaway we leave with them today in terms of preparing for the future? And that could be somebody at the beginning of their career, it could be somebody in the middle, or it could be someone in the end.
Yeah, I'd sort of touch on that actually, because I think the key takeaway is lifelong learning. The world is changing. It's happening all the time. The pace of change is accelerating. And, what's, going to equip you for that is, put on your seatbelt and be prepared for change, for lifelong learning, embrace those as opportunities.
Sarah?
I do think, and I see it and I feel it in my work, and it's, I suppose it's why I'm still here and I'm still in the water industry 14 years later. I do feel every day is a school day. I learn something new all the time, and I'm never doing the same thing. So be open to learning and to new experiences. And I guess back to something I think I said earlier, you can do more than you think. So don't close yourself off.
So mine would probably be have fun, because life's too short not to have fun, and to do it all with enthusiasm. Take the challenge on.
Brilliant. Lifelong learning. Every day is a school day. Have fun. I think that's a very good place to end today's podcast. A huge thank you, Sarah, dialed in from Northern Ireland, and Alice and Eloise in the studio with me today. It's been a fantastic podcast. I've really learned a lot. Certainly, it's been a school day for me today. So thank you very much for your contribution. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, then please like or subscribe, leave a review, and of course, tell your friends and colleagues. And, of course, feel free to plug it on social media. I'll be back soon with the next episode of Talking Infrastructure. Until then, take care and goodbye.